Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is a pinch hit episode of the BFIBs Almanac. There's a lot going on in spring training and baseball across the country. Normally I record on Wednesdays for these pinch hit episodes, but there's so much to talk about that I thought I would get down here on Tuesday the 19th and get right into a lot of what's going on in Cardinals camp and Major League Baseball across the board with free agents and Manny Machado signing, a lot of stuff. So before we get into that, I want to invite you to get a hold of the show on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac, and you can email bfibsalmanac@gmail.com and find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. All right, let's dive in. We got a lot to get to. First up, Carlos Martinez was shut down today for 2 weeks with shoulder fatigue. He is on a non-throwing program and will be strengthening the shoulder joint. He apparently reported this weakness that he felt himself, and he brought it to the team, told them what he was feeling, and they decided to shut him down. They did some tests. The MRI did not reveal any damage, but he is not strong enough in that shoulder muscle, shoulder joint. So it's not really a concern as far as physical damage, but the shoulder is always a concern. You can get over an elbow, you can have elbow surgery, but the shoulder is one of those things that you might never come back from if you're having real issues there. And he did go on the DL 3 times last year. I think they were all kind of different issues, but they were all sort of tied into that shoulder. You got the lat, the scap, all those different connected areas that are all related to that shoulder joint. So to me, it is a major concern. He is considered our ace of the staff. Whether you look at Michaelis or Flaherty as that guy, he's definitely one of those top pitchers. So I do think it's a concern. We'll keep an eye on him for a couple weeks, see how he progresses. They may even get him going a little sooner if he feels fine. But question is, was this a lack of preparation on his part? Was he not working out and getting strong enough to throw? Or is this just a lingering issue, injury from last season? Or, just fatigue? Has he been working out, been strengthening, and he kind of got a little tired and worn out at the beginning of spring training? So hopefully it's no big deal. Hopefully he's healthy and ready to go in a couple weeks. But that opens up the option for our next point, which is Alex Reyes faced hitters today. So if you recall from our last pinch hit episode, we discussed Alex Reyes being healthy and ready to go, but he was going to be about a week behind all the pitchers. So they were going to start facing hitters today, and he was going to start about a week from now. He was going to throw an extra couple of bullpen sessions between now and then. But they said he's progressing well. He feels good. He looks good. And so they had him face hitters today. I watched the video. He looked fine. I didn't see any issues. His control was a little off. He didn't throw all strikes, but that's to be expected. He hasn't pitched to hitters in quite a while. So all things I've heard sound okay. I didn't hear of any injuries or issues he had. So I definitely think, depending on how things progress with Martinez, Reyes definitely could be in line to replace Carlos in the starting rotation. Now, we've expressed other concerns with the rotation, namely Wainwright and Waka, but at this point, it looks like the biggest concern is going to be Carlos, and hopefully Reyes looks good and is sharp and can step right in as needed. Now, we discussed they've got 12 different pitchers that have been stretched out as starters, so they shouldn't have any trouble early on finding somebody who's going to be ready to start. But, actual, meaningful, big league ready pitchers are not that easy to find. So we'll see how that goes. All right, across baseball, the big story today was Manny Machado signed a 10-year, $300 million contract with the San Diego Padres. I believe he's got a 5-year opt-out in there halfway through. So It's not as high as he had hoped for. I think when this all started, he was saying, the starting point was 10 years, $300 million, and he was hoping that teams would work their way up from there. But as it turned out, this is apparently the best offer. I know the White Sox had an offer on the table, and they said they were shocked to find out that he signed with the Padres. They felt like they had the best offer. So I'm sure pretty soon we're going to find out what that offer was. Maybe it was, my guess would be that it was for more per year for less years. Maybe something like $35 million a year for 8 years or 7. He went with 10 years for 30 a year. And maybe the opt-out in there was a difference maker too. I don't know what the White Sox had. So I know there were 3 or 4 teams interested in Machado. The Phillies and Yankees were both pretty high on him. So I kind of look at this as a bit of a money grab. Maybe they were the only team offering a real contract offer, but San Diego is not historically a great franchise. Right now, they do supposedly have a really good farm system, a lot of good pitchers coming up, but they're not ready yet. And they've kind of proven not to be a year in and year out contender like some of these other major franchises. And so it's a little disappointing when you see a star player who can go anywhere he wants and he ends up going to a team that pays the most. I mean, it's to be expected to get the biggest contract you can, but I'd like to see these guys really go to a contender who's also in a position to pay, a premium. But, I wish winning played a heavier factor sometimes. But the other question is, will Harper get more or less than Machado? Most free agent lists you looked at have Harper at the top and Machado second. And most people seem to think Harper's going to get more, but I'm not so sure. I kind of think he might get less. He doesn't statistically put up the numbers that Machado does, really not even all that close. And he does have the marketability. He is sort of a face of the franchise guy, and Machado kind of isn't, especially with his antics in the postseason this past year. But he's had issues in the past, too, with attitude and effort and kind of dirty play and stuff. So as good as a player he is, he's not necessarily a guy who you throw out there as representing your team to the fans the way you would Harper. Harper's definitely that, magazine face, front of a video game kind of guy. And then that goes a long way for, the value of a player. But on the field, Harper is not as good as Machado. So I don't expect him to get 10 years, 35 a year. Unless, a bidding war breaks out and, the Phillies and the White Sox go at each other to try to get him. And they may both feel a little more desperate now that they didn't get their guy. But I don't know. We'll see. A lot of people are expecting him to get more. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up getting less. Not a lot less, but maybe 8 years, $28 million or something like that a year. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So speaking of free agents, there's all this narrative of the looming strike and frustration and anger among the players about free agents not getting signed. And I've heard a lot of conflicting viewpoints on that. John Mozeliak was on the Fast Lane this afternoon talking with Randy Carricker, and he mentioned he really had this kind of flippant attitude about it. He really doesn't think that it's going to be a problem. He thinks all these issues that are there will be resolved fairly easily between the players' union and owners, and that by the time the collective bargaining agreement is up, there won't be a need for a strike. I don't know if it's going to be that simple and that, laid back, but I don't think it's as desperate as some of these articles and some of these players are making it sound. But I decided to look into the list of available free agents, and I came across a CBS Sports page that ranked the top 50 free agents. And the way they ranked them is they had 5 different sports reporters, sports analysts, who all gave their own ranking. And then they averaged those 5 lists and came up with one list of the top 50 free agents. Now, this was not current free agents as far as this list also included guys who have signed. So this was the top 50 free agents going into this free agent period, but many of them have signed. In fact, of the top 50, 39 have signed, so only 11 players have not. Of the top 10, only 2 have not signed. That's Harper and Dallas Keuchel. And of the top 20, only 4 have not signed. So the other 2 are Craig Kimbrell and Marwin Gonzalez. So 4 of the top 20 have not signed. So nearly 80% of the top 50 free agents going into this offseason have signed with somebody. Now, maybe they didn't get the top dollar contract that they were hoping for, but some of these guys definitely got good contracts. And the ones that didn't, they signed it. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw what offers were out there, and they took what they felt comfortable taking. They didn't want to wait. Now, there are plenty of guys who have not signed yet. I don't think it's the 100 players that has been thrown around. I think there's really only like 50 or 60 available free agents left. And I think several just in the last couple of days have actually signed. So that list of unsigned players keeps shrinking and shrinking every day. And we are not well into, but we're a few days into spring training now, with pitchers have been there about a week and players reporting this week. But, we're definitely to the point where these guys are going to start feeling desperate and looking at retirement if they don't sign with somebody. But a lot of these unsigned players, especially in the top 50, have major question marks around them. These aren't just stud players who haven't had a contract. These are guys who are either, aging, they're in age 36, 35 seasons, or they've got, you're talking about some lefty pitchers that have major velocity issues and effectiveness issues. You're talking about, Marwin Gonzalez. Well, let's just look at those top 4. So, Harper, we know what he is, but he has question marks given the contract he's expecting. His defense is not that great. He's had big up and down swings in his overall WAR. His batting average 2 out of the last 3 seasons was in the 240s. He still has good on base percentage and he still has good overall numbers, but he's demanding the highest contract in all baseball, and his numbers don't reflect that. Same with Keuchel. We talked about him in the last episode. I think he could be a valuable piece, but it's not a no-brainer that he should be getting this, max contract or anything like that. And, here he is, the top available starting pitcher. Well, he's not going to get paid like a top starting pitcher because he's got health concerns. He's not as young as, some people would like. He's not a hard-throwing pitcher. He's a soft-tossing lefty. He can be effective, but, there's a reason he hasn't had a contract offer. Craig Kimbrell, he was talking about wanting a 6-year deal when free agency started. Here's a guy who's been closing for years and years now and showed signs of decline last season. Kind of struggled through the playoffs. So, here's a guy who is aging. He's got a lot of miles on his arm, and he's demanding a huge contract for a lot of years. There's a reason he's not signed yet. And same with Marwin Gonzalez. This is a utility player who's decent. He's got good numbers, but he's expecting a starting job. And the teams that are looking for a utility player, like the Cardinals were earlier in the offseason, are not going to guarantee him a starting job. And he's turning down offers or even making it known before these offers come in that he's going to turn down a backup utility role. So, he's doing it to himself. If he would accept the kind of offers that are being thrown at him for what teams view him as a value, he would be signed by now. And a lot of these guys fall into that same category. They're expecting the dollars and the years that were being thrown around years ago, and they have not adjusted. The players have not adjusted to what the owners are now seeing and thinking about. Which leads me to my last point. Why are players going unsigned? So we already talked about it. They're asking for too much upfront. They're demanding, this is what I want. Before they even hit the market, they're making it known, I want this many years for this many dollars. And that kind of is turning off some teams who just aren't in the market to spend that much. And it's kind of, they're avoiding this bidding war that can break out. A lot of times there might be a team who doesn't think that they're interested at that price, but when it starts out a little bit lower and they get involved, and now there's some negotiations going on, and they look into the player a little bit more, and they realize they're right there on the edge of getting that player. If we just offer one more year, we'll get him. Or if we just bump up that AAV another couple million, we'll get him. And that's how these bidding wars go back and forth. And next thing you know, you're getting your 10 years, 300 instead of 7 years, 250 or whatever. So I think the fact that these guys are making it clear up front, whether it's in the media or through their agents, that they're expecting this, really long length of a contract and really high dollar, that it's just turning some teams off before it even starts. So I do think that's part of it. The players, I think, are ignoring the analytics, which the owners are now not ignoring. These analytics are showing that you can get nearly as much value out of a much cheaper player, whether it's a minimum salary player or an arbitration eligible player, or just a veteran that's, doesn't cost as much because he doesn't quite put up the great numbers. It's kind of that law of diminishing returns. You definitely pay a huge premium for that last little bit of performance. It's the same thing with cars. It's the same thing with guitars. It's the same thing with pretty much anything. There's a certain value that you get for a certain dollar. And then when you want to get a little bit better, or let's just say the best of the best, you're going to pay, you might pay tenfold the premium to get that little bit of extra goodness. And I think these teams are realizing, it's not worth it. We don't want to pay $30 million a year to one guy when we could pay $7 million to another guy and get really close to that performance. And some of these, all-around players are going to give you better defense than a Harper. They're maybe going to not get on base as much, but their batting average is going to be a little better, and they're going to knock in maybe a few more RBIs. We've talked about Harper's only hit 100 RBIs one time in his career. So teams are really kind of evaluating, well, what's more important to us? What do we already have? What do we need? And do we want to pay $30 million to get a guy who's, not going to give us a whole lot more than Mike Moustakas, who signed for $9 million? So it really kind of, the players need to realize, hey, these owners are wising up. They're not all willing to pay that premium for that extra little bit of performance. Now, on the flip side, the players are arguing that owners are not trying to win, right? And I would argue that they are trying to win. They're just trying to do it at a value, a lower value. So if you put a team together and it's worth 88 wins, is that enough for you? Let's say your payroll is $100 million, and that's expected to get you, they're projecting 88 wins with that team. Do you want to spend $140 million just to add another 4 wins to get you up to 92, maybe 93? Is that worth $40 million more to you as an owner? Some fans would say, sure it is. Give me everything you can get to get as many wins as possible. We're trying to make the playoffs here. Some fans would say, no, it's not worth it. We don't want to, tie our hands down the road when we might have an opportunity to get a guy, trade for somebody who maybe has a big salary and push us over the hump, when we can't because we spent that $40 million on a player who got injured or a player who's not giving us the return we expected. Or we would have made the playoffs anyway at 90 wins, and, we paid to get the 93, and now we can't afford to get that pitcher who's going to help us through the playoffs or whatever, right? So not everybody is on board with just spend. There is a certain wisdom to spending less, but at the same time, if you're just trying to save a buck and you're okay with 88 wins and take your chances that you'll get in as the second wild card or something, then I can see the disappointment with fans and the players. You want to, as a player that's already on a team, they want to be on the most competitive team they can get. And when they see guys out there looking for jobs who can help, and the owner is just saying, yeah, no thanks, that would be frustrating as a player. So I can see both sides of it. But the other kind of a major factor that I think goes into this is the whole rebuilding process. We've talked about tanking and rebuilding. That sort of was like a thing you didn't even talk about doing. Tanking was such a bad term back in the day. It was like just giving up. You gave up on the season. We're just tanking. It wasn't even for any real reason. It was just like, we don't care. We're not going to try to win. Well, now tanking is part of rebuilding, and you're going to get those draft picks, and it's the whole 5-year plan thing, right? And fans are kind of okay with it. Not everybody, but when you see that plan work out, like in the case of the Astros and the Cubs and even the Royals, going back a little bit, these teams that didn't play well for a few years, they dumped off their good players, they unloaded salaries, and they got some of the best draft picks, and they were wise with who they picked, and they rebuilt their farm system, and those guys have come up now and are contributing in a big way and has led to World Series championships. And that's the whole thing. That's the point of rebuilding. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tank for a few years, unload some of these, premium players, start over, and then we'll be even more competitive down the road. Well, when it works, that sounds great. And you talk to Houston fans, and I'm sure they love the way their plan has worked out. Chicago fans loved it in 2016, but they're a little getting antsy now with the way they have not performed up to their expectations of, putting a dynasty together. And Royals fans, I'm sure, are frustrated that some of those guys that were there are now gone. But hey, they had their World Series, and you would never want to give that back. So that whole tanking and rebuilding thing has worked out. Now, there's some teams where it seems like they're just always rebuilding, and they never are getting better. And when they have the opportunity to improve, they don't take advantage of it. Sort of like I would put the Pirates in that category. The Marlins are definitely in that category. There's plenty of other teams that I'm sure their fan bases would complain about their situation. But I think the whole rebuilding aspect that it's become accepted now makes it okay for the owners to feel good about, not signing some of these top players and starting over. And that is a lengthy process. It might take 2 or 3 rebuilds in a row. That first one didn't work out. We're going to do it again. So the fact that fans and media are more open to that, I think makes the owners more open to it, which is going to cause the players to be more frustrated because not every team is in a constant push to sign players and compete and get them and outbid other teams for the top free agents. That used to be the way you improved, was to get the best guys you could get. Whether it was trading for the best players or signing the best players in free agency, that's how you did it. But not anymore. You rebuild through the draft and you pick up the occasional piece that you hope you get a value, kind of like a Goldschmidt. And that's how these teams are redoing it. So anyway, I think it'll be interesting to see how the free agency settles out this year. And with this big $300 million contract that Machado got, and probably something similar that Harper's going to get, is that going to defuse the Players Association a little bit with their argument about owners not willing to spend. And so we'll see. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. So that's all I got. A little bit of a rundown of Cardinals spring training, free agency all across baseball, some hypothetical situations in there, and we'll see how it goes moving forward. So anyway, I want to thank you for listening. I encourage you to get a hold of the show. And until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.